ready. I mean, my children are so little right now. They're 2 and 7 months.
For the first time again after 9 horrific months. Well, as they brought it gone, 5 of those. So when I was rescued, well, when I was kidnapped, I felt like that admission do. Do you still play the harp? I know with 3 little children, it's harder to play the harp these days. Sure. Drawn by our children.
Elizabeth Smart's journey back to some semblance of a normal life has inspired millions today.
It happens in like dark, obscure areas, like dangerous areas.
But she's the remarkable young woman that she is today.
To come here was easy. Her grandmother lives in the valley. Smart is happily married with 3 kids.
In that moment that I knew that nobody ever again was going to be able to hurt me.
Elizabeth Smart's journey back to some semblance of a normal life has inspired millions today. She was in the desert, and we're going to share the message she has for America's children and parents.
When you have
Dale's coming up. All right, thank you, Mike. In 2002, Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her bedroom in Salt Lake City. Miraculously, after 9 months of unspeakable abuse, she was reunited with her parents. Her journey back to some semblance of a normal life has inspired millions. Elizabeth Smart was in Palm Desert for the Barbara Sinatra Center Luncheon today. Our Daytona Everett had a chance to speak with Elizabeth Smart and her father, Daytona.
Yeah, Gina, we spoke with Elizabeth about her journey and how it's led to where she is today. A confident woman speaking for those who don't have a voice, a victim who didn't let her captors win. Elizabeth Smart is a champion, a fitting speaker for today's Barbara Sinatra Champion Honors Lunch.
It was in that moment that I knew that nobody ever again was going to be able to hurt me the way that these 2 people had hurt me the last 9 months, because my dad was there and he wasn't going to let anyone do that.
At 14 years old, Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped from her bed and held captive for 9 months by 2 strangers. Repeatedly abused, repeatedly raped.
We get these ideas that kidnapping and rape and sexual violence only happens in like dark, obscure areas, like dangerous areas, but that's not true. I mean, it can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter.
Fast forward to now, Smart advocates for victims in her same position, like kidnapping victim Jamie Kloss.
I definitely do believe there is a cultural shift taking place. I think it needs to be even bigger and broader, and not just for women, but for men too.
Smart broadening her audience at the Barbara Sinatra Foundation Luncheon, sharing her story on stage once again with NBC's Natalie Morales.
She truly is that example of what being a champion and what being a survivor is all about.
A champion with a rock-solid support system.
I've covering her story for years and years. I've gotten to know her family very well, and you know she's the remarkable young woman that she is today because she's all about family, and her family rescued her.
Her family, including her dad, Edward Smart.
We really need to teach our children life skills that will enable them and empower them.
Which he has since day one, supporting his beloved daughter and her mission.
This little time in your life that this abuse went on compared to your entire life is so small, and to let it dominate and ruin the rest of your life is a horrible thing.
A horrible thing that Smart continues to advocate against.
All forgiveness is loving yourself enough to let go.
Wow. We should all learn from that.
To turn the world from victim survivors to thrivers. Smart's father says she speaks at 2 to 3 events per week, but the decision to come here was easy. Her grandmother lives in the valley. Smart is happily married with 3 kids who are also in attendance today.
raise me up to more than I can be. You raise me up so I can stand on mountains. You raise me up to walk on the stormy seas. I am strong when I am on your shoulders. You raise me up to more than I can be.
That someday they're gonna hear your story. Will you tell them? Well, I'm certainly not gonna hide it from them. And I feel like already, I mean, my children are so little right now. They're 2 and 7 months. But already I like struggle with not wanting to be like so overprotected that they don't experience life, but at the same time protect them enough, and finding that balance, that's hard and it's scary. But I feel like there are some simple things that I do every day. I tell them that I love them every single day. I talk to my daughter all the time, and I always tell her nobody has the right to hurt you or scare you or make you feel afraid. And if anyone ever should, you need to tell me, okay? Tell Mama when someone hurts you or scares you. And she's always like, okay, Mama.
Smart.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to catch up with Elizabeth, because she truly is one of the most inspirational people I think I've ever met, ever had the pleasure to interview. I've gotten to know her families. I've interviewed her family as well. I've interviewed them a couple of times. And I think what Hal said is so true, that abuse does not define a person. It's how they live their lives. And Elizabeth has shown us what it means to be a true survivor and a champion. So there's no truer champion today who deserves this honor more than Elizabeth Smart. Let's talk about the miracle, your miracle. And I can remember being in a newsroom at MSNBC. I needed to do. And I remember talking to you about this before, and I know that you've said you've never had therapy or anything. How did you do that? I mean, how are you, is it just that strength again, that inner strength and faith that got you through in your family?
As I've thought about it as I got older, and as I have children of my own, I think there are many different types of therapy. So no, I did not have your traditional therapy, but looking back, I do feel like I did find different therapies in my life. I love music, and that was very healing. Whenever I couldn't articulate how I felt, or frustration, or anger, or pain, I felt like I was able to release those feelings through music. I love horseback riding. I always felt like it was kind of an escape from reality, to get up on a horse, and it just kind of put everything in perspective for me, that this is just one small moment of my life, and I have the rest of my life ahead of me, and ultimately it's up to me to live my life the way that I want to. And that was always just like so freeing, and especially to be around these great big huge powerful animals who did not care who I was, who did not care about my past or my history. I mean, you know, all they cared about was the connection between us as rider and horse. And that was empowering and therapeutic, I felt.
Incredible. I want to see if you can replay that moment when you saw your mom and dad for the first time again after 9 horrific months.
Well, I'd been brought to a smaller police station in Sandy, and I'd actually been handcuffed on the way over there, and nobody really told me what was going on. So
Why did they handcuff you?
I'm not completely sure, but if I had to guess, I would say it was probably protocol that you weren't allowed to sit in the back seat of a police car unless you're arrested.
Wow.
And to be fair, I bet they had no idea what to do. I bet they'd never been in that situation either, and they didn't know what I'd been through, and if I was normal or I was dangerous, or I'm sure they just felt that was a precaution. Not that I think it's right to arrest victims, because I don't.
But they do work.
But
Yeah.
to be fair to them, I just think they had no idea what to do. But having that experience, that big, and I'm going to go to jail. So I remember being brought to this small little precinct, and I was brought to this small little room where I just thought, this must be a holding cell before they take me somewhere else. And I was just sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I can't believe it. Like, I've been with these two monsters for 9 months, and I've survived it, and now I survived them only to be going to jail. I can't believe it. And I remember, it seemed like I waited in there for a long time, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Time almost stood still in those moments. And I remember the door just bursting open, and my dad ran into the room. And honestly, it took me a minute to respond because I thought I was in trouble. And then all of a sudden, my dad was there, and he was hugging me and crying, and I think I went into shock. But I remember as he hugged me and he was holding on to me, I remember it was in that moment that I knew that nobody ever again was going to be able to hurt me the way that these two people had hurt me the last 9 months, because my dad was there and he wasn't going to let anyone do that ever again. And that even if I did go to jail, it was going to be okay because my dad was there. And I remember we were taken up to the main headquarters where my mom was waiting, and I remember exactly how she looked and exactly what she had on, and I just remember thinking she looked like the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. I mean, every year People magazine comes out with their top 50 most beautiful people, and every year in my mind I'm always like, oh, you're wrong again. Because
Lois is here. I know she's with the kids.
I have 2 sleeping children, so she's with them right now. But
I'm their weakness, and knowing how to spot that weakness and use it against them.
for 9 months, I had watched them manipulate each other and threaten me, and I had watched how they lived their lives, and I realized that if I ever wanted to be rescued, if I ever wanted to be found, I needed to make it back to Utah, because during those 9 months that I'd been gone, 5 of those months were spent in Southern California. And I just knew if I wanted any chance of ever seeing my family again, we had to get back to Utah. And my captors had begun to speak of other places that they were going to go and try to kidnap other girls. And they were saying big cities like New York and Boston, and all I could remember thinking was, oh my goodness, if we go to one of those big cities, I will never be found. I will never be rescued. I mean, because there's such big cities and such melting pots for the world that will just blend in. And so I thought a lot about how they manipulated everyone around them and how they got away with everything they did. And I mean, everything they did by manipulating religion. And I also think you kind of have to look at that period of time. I was kidnapped, and it was less than a year after 9/11 had happened. So everyone, I think, was very, very sensitive, and especially to any form of extremism. And my captors, I think they realized that, and they tapped into that sort of extremism appearance and way of acting and way of life. And so people would stay away from us. But it had got even extended beyond just how we looked. It had extended into really every part of their life, because they found that they could get away with anything by blaming it on religion. And so I had watched that for 9 months, and I just remember thinking, I've got to get back to Utah. How can I get back to Utah? What can I do? And so I remember coming to him, and his whole claim to me was that he was a prophet, that he didn't want to kidnap me, but he had to because God commanded him, and we could spend forever talking about that. But that was his whole story. So I remember coming to him and just saying, I have this feeling, and I know God would never speak to me, but I know He'll tell you. Could you ask God if we're supposed to return to Salt Lake? Because this feeling just won't leave me alone. And I know, you're His prophet, and well, you're His servant here on earth. Could you please ask Him? And for him, I think that was him feeling like I was completely 100% fully under His control now, that I do anything He wanted. Not that, that ever stopped Him before, because it didn't. But I think He felt that that was me being willing to accept anything that He said now. And so He came back and He said, I think you're right. And that's how it was decided we'd return to Salt Lake. And we hitchhiked back, which would not recommend doing, but it did the job.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then the rest is history.
Yeah, the rest is history.
And I know that you've said in recent interviews that you forgive Wanda Barzee, who's been released from prison a year ago. How do you forgive?
I guess I have my own definition of forgiveness, because I never want to see her ever again. I never want her to come near me or near my family, and especially not near my children. And for me, forgiveness has nothing to do, really, with the other person. Has nothing to do with the person, with the people that hurt me. It has nothing to do with Brian Mitchell or Wanda Barzee. For me, forgiveness, it's a very personal thing. I guess I am not like a mathematic kind of person. I'm not good at it. It's never been my forte. But the best way I can explain it is by using math, because I want to be 100%. I want to be 100% a mother to my children. I want to love them 100%. I want to be 100% a wife to my husband, and I want to love him 100%. And I guess in my mind, that if I stayed angry, if I held on to that, that would be taking up part of who I am. That would be taking up part of me. And that would mean that I wouldn't be able to be 100%, because some degree of percentage would always be holding on to that anger and that pain and that frustration. And so for me, really all forgiveness is loving yourself enough to let go. With middle-aged men, I didn't like being left alone with anyone that ever tried to use religion as a reason for doing something. I definitely was wary, and there were definite times that I felt very uncomfortable, and whenever that happened, I would just leave. And that would be my advice for anyone and everyone who ever feels uncomfortable. Just leave. Your safety is more important than somebody else being offended because you left. There was a time, but I was very hesitant. But I was that little girl that dreamed in happily ever after. I was that little girl that dreamed of meeting my Prince Charming. And that's what I always, I always wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be a harpist and a mom. And I wanted to have children, and I wanted to be carried off into the sunset on horseback. And that was what I wanted. So when I was rescued, when I was kidnapped, I felt like that had been taken away from me. I felt like I would never have that chance of having, meeting my true love and having children and having a family and being a mother. I felt like that had been taken away from me because my captor had told me that I was now his wife, and that I was supposed to do everything that he said, and I just felt like that dream of happiness had just been ripped away. So when I came back, I was as excited about that, of having that dream back, as I was with everything else. And at that time, no, I certainly was not ready to immediately jump into a relationship. I was 15, I was still a kid, but I had about a decade in between the time that I was rescued and the time that I got married to go through. I don't know that any teenage years are normal, but to have those experiences and go on to school and to have relationships and ultimately to find the one person that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And going back to what I was saying at the very beginning of our conversation, that because I chose my husband. I wasn't forced, I wasn't kidnapped, I wasn't, made to do something on the threat of death. I mean, I chose him and I loved him, so that wasn't hard.
And I hear you can do a good Scottish brogue. Because he's from Scotland, right?
He is. Although he's embarrassed when I do it, which I think I do.
Because you're probably
really
better
well.
at it than him.
Well,
Tell me how you met in brogue.
right, well. I don't know if I could carry it on that long, actually.
Yeah.
No, we were both serving missions for our church in Paris, and we met on our mission. And when we finished, I finished 6 months before he did, and so we wrote handwritten letters back and forth to each other. And then he invited me out to Scotland after he was finished, and I went, and when I walked off the plane, he was waiting for me, and it was like, when I saw him, it felt like I'd come home. Felt like he was my best friend I'd always missed. And that was it.
Love that. You talked about your dream of wanting to be a mom, which you've done, and play the harp, which you do. Do you still play the harp? I know with 3 little children, it's harder to play the harp these days.
Well, it sits in the corner, mostly covered. My kids all think it's a jungle gym and think it's good to climb on. That's just too expensive of a jungle gym to have damaged. So these days it mostly sits in the corner, covered up.
They are framed pictures drawn by our children, and we hope you enjoy them. And thank you all for being here, for supporting this wonderful cause. And I hope to see you on April 24th at one night only. Thank you.